The Russo-Kazan Wars, a series of conflicts between the Grand Duchy of Moscow, later the Tsardom of Russia, and the Kazan Khanate, played a crucial role in shaping the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe and Central Asia during the 15th and 16th centuries. These wars were not merely isolated skirmishes, but rather a protracted and complex struggle that reflected the broader dynamics of power, religion, culture, and identity in the region. The wars culminated in the eventual annexation of the Kazan Khanate by Russia, significantly expanding Russian influence and laying the groundwork for the future Russian Empire. The origins of the Russo-Kazan Wars can be traced back to the disintegration of the Golden Horde, a Mongol state that had once dominated much of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. By the 15th century, the Golden Horde had fragmented into several smaller khanates, including the Kazan Khanate, which emerged as a significant power in the Volga region. The Kazan Khanate, established in 1438, was a successor state to the Golden Horde, and its rulers were of Mongol Tatar origin. The city of Kazan, the capital of the Khanate, became a vital center of trade, culture, and Islamic scholarship, attracting merchants and scholars from across the Muslim world. The rise of the Kazan Khanate coincided with the gradual ascent of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which was beginning to assert its independence from the remnants of Mongol rule. Under the leadership of Grand Prince Ivan III, Moscow embarked on a policy of territorial expansion, consolidating its control over neighboring principalities and asserting its dominance in the region. The growing power of Moscow inevitably brought it into conflict with the Kazan Khanate, which controlled key trade routes along the Volga River and posed a significant obstacle to Moscow's expansionist ambitions. The first major confrontation between Moscow and Kazan occurred in 1467 when Ivan III launched a military campaign against the Kazan Khanate. This campaign, however, ended in failure, as the Muscovite forces were unable to capture Kazan and suffered heavy losses. Despite this setback, Ivan III continued to exert pressure on the Kazan Khanate, employing a combination of military force, diplomacy, and subversion to undermine Kazan's power. The Grand Prince sought to exploit divisions within the Kazan ruling elite, supporting rival factions and promoting internal discord in the hope of weakening the Khanate from within. The Russo-Kazan Wars were marked by a series of intermittent conflicts, punctuated by periods of uneasy peace and shifting alliances. The wars were not solely a bilateral struggle between Moscow and Kazan, but also involved various other regional powers, including the Crimean Khanate, the Nogai Horde, and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, all of which had their own interests in the outcome of the conflict. The shifting alliances and the fluid nature of power in the region meant that the wars were often unpredictable and characterized by sudden changes in fortune for both sides. One of the most significant episodes in the Russo-Kazan Wars was the Siege of Kazan in 1487. Ivan III, determined to assert his dominance over the Khanate, launched a major military campaign against Kazan, leading a large army that included Russian, Tatar, and Finnish troops. The siege was a protracted and brutal affair, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Ultimately, the Muscovite forces managed to breach the city's defenses, and Kazan fell to Moscow. Ivan III installed a puppet ruler Ali Khan on the Kazan throne, effectively turning the Khanate into a vassal state of Moscow. However, this victory was not decisive, and the Kazan Khanate would continue to resist Moscow's control for several more decades. The early 16th century saw a renewed intensification of the Russo-Kazan Wars, as the Kazan Khanate, under the leadership of Muhammad Amin and later Sahib Jiri, sought to reassert its independence from Moscow. The Khanate forged alliances with the Crimean Khanate and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, both of which were eager to curb Moscow's growing power. The Muscovite rulers, now under the leadership of Vasily III and later his son, Ivan the Terrible, responded with a series of military campaigns aimed at subjugating Kazan once and for all. The most famous and consequential of these campaigns was the one led by Ivan IV in 1552. Ivan IV, who had recently assumed the title of Tsar of all Russia, was determined to bring an end to the long-standing conflict with Kazan and to solidify his control over the Volga region. The campaign of 1552 was meticulously planned and executed, with Ivan IV personally leading a large and well-equipped army that included artillery, infantry, and cavalry. The Russian forces laid siege to Kazan, employing heavy artillery to bombard the city's defenses and digging tunnels to undermine the walls. The siege of Kazan in 1552 was a turning point in the Russo-Kazan Wars. After several weeks of intense fighting, the Russian forces succeeded in breaching the city's defenses, and Kazan was captured on October 2, 1552. The fall of Kazan marked the end of the Kazan Khanate as an independent state and its incorporation into the Russian state. The capture of Kazan was a momentous event in Russian history, celebrated in Russian chronicles and folklore as a symbol of the triumph of orthodoxy over Islam and the expansion of Russian power into the Muslim world. The conquest of Kazan had far-reaching consequences for the region and for the future of Russia. With the annexation of the Kazan Khanate, Russia gained control over the vital trade routes along the Volga River, opening up new opportunities for trade and commerce. The conquest also paved the way for further Russian expansion into the Ural Mountains in Siberia, setting the stage for the transformation of Russia into a vast multi-ethnic empire. The incorporation of the Muslim Tatar population of Kazan into the Russian state also had significant implications for Russian identity and statecraft, as the rulers of Moscow sought to navigate the challenges of governing a multi-ethnic and multi-religious empire. The fall of Kazan also had a profound impact on the Muslim world. The conquest was seen by many in the Muslim world as a major setback, marking the loss of one of the most important Islamic centers in the region. The destruction of Kazan's mosques and the forced conversion of many Tatars to Christianity were seen as acts of aggression against Islam, fueling resentment and resistance among the Muslim population. However, the Russian authorities, recognizing the challenges of governing a predominantly Muslim population, eventually adopted a policy of religious tolerance, allowing the Tatars to practice Islam and even granting them a degree of autonomy within the Russian state. The legacy of the Russo-Kazan Wars continued to shape Russian policy and identity for centuries. The wars were a formative experience for the Russian state, contributing to the development of a centralized and autocratic system of government under the Tsar. The conquest of Kazan also reinforced the idea of Russia as a defender of orthodoxy and a bulwark against the Islamic world, a theme that would continue to resonate in Russian foreign policy in the centuries to come. Moreover, the incorporation of the Kazan Khanate into the Russian state laid the foundations for the multi-ethnic and multicultural character of the Russian Empire, a legacy that continues to influence the Russian Federation today. In conclusion, the Russo-Kazan Wars were a defining series of conflicts that shaped the course of Russian and Eastern European history. The wars were not just a struggle for territory and power, but also a clash of cultures, religions, and identities. The eventual Russian victory and the annexation of the Kazan Khanate marked a significant turning point in the history of the region, leading to the expansion of Russian influence and the emergence of Russia as a major power. The legacy of the Russo-Kazan Wars continues to be felt in the cultural and political landscape of Russia and the broader region, serving as a reminder of the complex and often tumultuous history of this part of the world.